Hey guys, Frosty Knives here, back with another book review. Today we're going to be taking a look at something a little different. Today we are going to be taking a look at the very first book, Volume 1, in the Dragonriders of Pern series. I wanted to do something a little different today. We are going to be starting with Dragonflight by Mccaffrey. Now, for those of you that may or may not know, I am a very big Mccaffrey fan. I read a lot of these books when I was a kid, and I wanted to go back and reread them as an adult because there's a lot that I haven't read. It's a very large series, so I thought that I would start reading the Dragon Rider books in publication order, starting with the first one, Dragonflight. This is the first of her opening trilogy of the Pern series. I don't normally review fantasy / science fiction on my channel, but I wanted to give you my thoughts on what I thought of these books, now that it's been a good 30 some odd years since I've read them. So I don't know if I'm going to continue the series like I did with the Dark Tower. I'm going to try to at least read and review. I'm going to read them all, but I'm going to try to read and review at least the original trilogy, which is Dragonflight, Dragon Quest, and the White Dragon. And depending on how people will react to it, or whether or not people like it or not, will determine whether or not I actually review each of the books as I go through it, because there's quite a bit of them. I have at least 15. There's somewhere around 15, 20, I'm not sure. I've got a lot of them sitting over there in various forms. But we're going to start with this one, and what I liked and what I didn't like about it. So this book was published in 1968. So we're going back, it's a way back playback. 1968 is when she published this first book. And it clocks in at, 286 pages. But actually it clocks in at about 303 pages because the last bit of the book are just sort of appendices. Who is who is what, who rides where, what do terms mean, yada yada. The actual story ends on 286, and then you have quite a few appendices that come later. It's a short read. This book shares a lot in common with the first book of the Dark Tower series, shares a lot in common with the Gunslinger, in that both books were originally published. So there's 4 parts to this book, right? Part 1, 2, 3, 4, and there's Where Search, Dragonflight, Dustfall, and The Cold Between. There's 4 parts. The first 2 parts were published as short little novellas in Analog Science Fiction magazine back in the 60s. Very similar to what Stephen King did with The Gunslinger, where he took each of the 5 parts. They were previously published in novella form in magazines, and then he took them back, put them in a book, added some new material, and released The Gunslinger. And this is what Anne McCaffrey did. She published the first 2 in the science fiction magazines, and then had some talk with her editors and publishers and agents and whatnot, and added some more material and published it as a book. And now we have a full-fledged novel. So both series seem to have some similar origins. But I'm going to read the plot summary from Wikipedia, what this is about, because it is written 40 some odd years ago. The language is a little, it's a little dated and whatnot. The book is very tightly woven, and there's virtually no bloat in it. But I'm going to read to you the plot summary. And there's 2 main characters in the book. There's Lessa and there's Flar. We'll get to that, but Dragonflight is the story of Lessa, the sole survivor of the noble ruling family of Ruatha Hold on the northern continent of Pern. So this takes place on another planet that they have named Pern. It's a very agrarian society, and there are individual holds, if you will, which sort of resembles like city-states, right? So there's 6 holds around Pern that have been populated by humans. It's very much like a farming community, and whatnot, and very low on the technological scale. So Lessa is the sole survivor of Ruathahold. When the rest of her family is killed by a cruel usurper named Fax, she survives by disguising herself as a drudge, partly through simply adopting a slovenly appearance, but also by using her hereditary telepathic abilities to make others see her as far older and less attractive than she actually is. So Lessa is telepathic. Her only friend is a watch wear, which is this tiny little dragon lizard-like thing that sort of alerts the wear when things are happening. A somewhat telepathic animal related to dragons that guards the hold. Lessa psychically influences other hold workers to do less than their best work or to become clumsy or inefficient in order to sabotage Ruatha as part of her strategy to make it economically unproductive so that Fax will renounce it and she can retake her hold. So that's where we start, right? She's trying to overthrow the usurper who went around and basically took over all 5 of the holds. Flar is a wing leader at Bendon Weir and rider of the bronze dragon Nementh. He finds Lessa while searching for candidates to impress on a new queen dragon. So a queen was born, and they go on this thing that they call a search, and they're looking for humans, and they pair up female dragons with female humans and male dragons with male humans. So there's a queen dragon, and they're looking for a telepath. They're going on a search, looking for a telepathic human that they can choose to psychically bond with this dragon, with this queen dragon. The current queen has a batch of eggs due to hatch shortly, including a crucial golden egg. After killing Fax in single combat, following the rules of the Pernese code, he realizes that Lessa has manipulated him emotionally to kill Fax and engineered Fax's renouncement. Flar recognizes that Lessa possesses both unusually strong psychic abilities and great strength of will. He recognizes her potential to be the strongest Weir woman in recent history and the path to his own leadership at Bendon Weir. Flar convinces a reluctant Lessa to give up her birthright as Lord Holder of Ruathahold for the larger domain of the Dragon Weir, and she agrees to pass the title on to Fax's newborn son, who we get to in the later books. Flar takes Lessa to Bendon Weir, where she impresses the queen hatchling Ramoth and becomes the Weir woman, the new co-leader of the last active Weir. On Ramoth's first mating flight, Nementh catches her, and by Weir tradition, this makes Flar the Weir leader. So what is the purpose of dragons, right? The purpose of dragons is that every 250 years, Pern is orbited by this erratic little planet that they call the Red Star. And every 215 years, the Red Star passes close enough into Pern's atmosphere or orbit to drop what they call threads onto Pern. And these threads attack anything living and burrow into the ground and sort of destroy living organisms and make the planet barren and whatnot. And it is the Dragonriders' job to, when the thread fall comes, to attack the threads and burn them in the air and to destroy threads. That is the purpose of dragons in Pern. One Weir by itself is not enough to defend the planet. In the past, there had been 6, but the other 5 Weirs are now empty, deserted since the last pass, Threadfall, centuries before. In a desperate attempt to increase their numbers, a new queen named Prideth and her rider, Kylara, are sent back in time 10 years to allow Prideth time to mature and reproduce. Lessa then travels 400 years into the past to bring the 5 missing Weirs forward in time to repopulate the dragon population. This is a huge strain for both her and Ramoth. She convinces the Dragonriders of the 5 Weirs to go with her to their future, and they use the Red Star as a guide to make smaller, less strenuous hops forward in time. This not only provides much-needed skilled reinforcements in the battle against the thread, but explains how and why the 5 Weirs that were abandoned. It's a very jumbled Wikipedia thing, but basically, they are living in a 400-year period of inactivity. There have been no thread falls in 400 years, and because of that, everybody thinks it's a myth. People think it's a myth, that the threads are gone, that nothing is going to come anymore, that the Dragonriders are obsolete, that the old traditions are obsolete, that they don't need to uphold them anymore. and they don't know why they need to do that. But Flar, being a traditionalist, knows that the threads aren't gone. It's just a very long period of inactivity, and he's doing his best to make sure that everything is up and ready so that when the threads fall, they're prepared, right? That's the big thing. And there used to be 6 weirs, but 5 are deserted, and only Bendon Weir has dragons. 1 dragon, and they have very little dragons, and, you know, they don't know what to do with it. So Flar and Lessa are co-leaders of this weir, and Lessa discovers that the dragons of Pern have this unique ability where they can teleport instantly from place to place on the planet. So that's how they get to where they don't actually fly from place to place. They teleport instantaneously to specific spots on the planet. Well, she discovered that the dragons actually can time travel. So they can not only teleport between places, but they can teleport between times. They can go back in time. They can go forward in time. All they need is reference points, right? They're telepathic. They have a bond. They think of a reference point in a time and place, and the dragon can teleport them there. She discovers that they can do that. So they go back in time about 10 years so they can sort of send the queen back and sort of populate it. And they populate it, but they get 72 dragons, but it's not enough for all the threads that they know are coming. So her big plan is to go back 400 years in the past to the last thread fall, take all the dragons and the Dragonriders and whatnot from all the 5 weirs and bring them forward in time so that they have the numbers and the manpower and the riders and everything to battle the thread. And that is why the 5 weirs are abandoned, because it's all time travel. She brought them forward in time and she didn't know it, and it's all time travel. These dragons can do all these time, so it's a very time travel-y book. So at the end of the story, all the Pern has been repopulated with dragons. All the dragons and the Dragonriders and their technology have come forward in time 400 years. They've got 1,800 dragons and all this stuff and flamethrowers and whatnot. And now they can finally confront the thread that is falling on Pern after 4 centuries of people saying, it's all done, it's over, it's never going to happen again, and we're safe. Well, they're not safe. And so that's basically the story, right? As a kid, I was fascinated by this story. And as an adult, I'm still somewhat fascinated by this story because it's a story about dragons and time travel and these mysterious threads that we find out later what they are that fall from the sky. And there's a lot of world building in this book because it's the first Pern book. And so they have to talk about, you know, what the holds are and the dragons and whatnot. Now, the dragons, I just want to clarify that they're not real dragons that we know. They are dragons of Pern. So they're a little different than the dragons that we have because they can't breathe fire on their own. They have to chew firestone in order to produce fire. So they chew firestone, and that sort of creates a gas that intertwines with their digestive acids, and when the dragons breathe that gas out, it ignites upon contact to oxygen, and that makes their flame. So they can't inherently create fire. So that's a little different, right? Every fantasy story has its different take on dragons and biology and what they can and what they can't do. The dragons are telepathic, so they bond with humans, and they one with a rider, and one rider to one dragon, and they bond. They create this bond, which is very strong and can be very emotionally damaging to either a dragon or a rider when one of them loses the other, right? If you become dragonless, that creates this mental break in you that you've lost this other part of you. And the thing that may be unique to Anne McCaffrey's dragons, because I don't know if other dragons, I'm not very up on all the different types of fantasy literature in the world. So to my knowledge, this is the only book or the only stories where it's explained that dragons can teleport from between place and place and that dragons can travel through time. I don't know of any other stories where that's explained that way, right? Like, certainly, like in Game of Thrones, the dragons don't teleport from place to place. They have to fly, right? It'd be a lot shorter of a series if Daenerys just took her dragons and teleported instantly to King's Landing and boom, they're there. But they couldn't. They had to actually physically make a journey. So being able to teleport and being able to teleport through time may be something that's uniquely inherent to the dragons that she created. If I'm wrong, somebody will tell me in the comments. I know they will. But I've never come across that before in literature. It's a good story. It's really well put together. And a lot of it is world building. A lot of it is setting the ground for the series to come. I will say that they do talk a lot about the thread. And even though they talk a lot about the thread and talk a lot about the battles with the thread, there's actually very little thread battling in the book. The book actually ends on the battle, right? They're at the morning, the dawn of the threadfall, and all the dragons are prepared, and they go to battle, and that's sort of where the book ends, on a battle of them fighting the thread. So even though it talks a lot about it, talks a lot about what the thread can do and the danger that it causes, we don't actually see the dragons battling the threads a lot. Maybe they will in other books. I don't know. Maybe she just doesn't talk about it. Maybe it's just a thing where she's like, yeah, those are threads, and the dragons went and took care of them in the sky, and yay, everything is safe with the world again. I don't know. But certainly in this first book, you don't see a lot of real battling like you would think you would expect to see descriptions, chapters of these dragons battling this thread, and you don't. Very brief descriptions of these battles. So I would have liked to have seen more than that, but hey, 1968, and this is what we got, and a lot of world building is going on. The characters are very, they're pretty well fleshed out. They're pretty well rounded. They're they're old-timey characters, right? This was written 40 some odd years ago, maybe even longer. My math is wonky. So people wrote characters a lot differently in the 60s than they do now. But overall, they weren't wooden. They didn't feel like cardboard characters. They felt like people. They felt like actual, people. They were pretty well fleshed out. The book, even though it was written a long time ago, it wasn't that hard to follow. There was always a language that you have to, right? Because when you're creating these fantasy stories, you're creating your own language, your own words, your own things, your own names for things, and your own names for people. So the names of people and the names of dragons and the way she creates words and world builds, it takes a little bit of getting used to. Of what she's naming what, which is why we have a dragon index, right, in the back of the book to help you with that. Anytime you're world building, that's the thing that happens. But overall, I thought this was a really good introduction to the series. Still as excited to read about dragons and to read about, Dragonriders and them battling things in the skies and whatnot. And, I like this type of environment. Very Skyrim-ish, right? They're very, very medieval fantasy. I mean, all these books, like the Dragonriders of Pern books and, games like Skyrim, games like Oblivion, and books like Game of Thrones, they all borrow from the same sort of pot, right? Tolkien, is probably one of the ones that started this up. But this kind of story goes way back. These fantasy stories go way back, and they all sort of borrow from the same pot. So you're going to find a lot of similar things in fantasy books because they're borrowing from the same communal pot as all the other fantasy books are doing. But overall, she's putting her new little spin and twist on things. The ability to be able to travel back and forth through times on dragons. That's sort of new, I think, to what dragons can do. So that's a new wrinkle. And I think as the series progresses and as we get further into Pern's history, we'll find out more about where do these people come from and what is the history of Pern, and you'll get to delve into, there's 15, 14 books you really get to delve into all the backstory and the side stories and filling in the blanks. But as a volume 1 of the Dragonriders of Pern, this was a really good book. And I think a lot of people, I think you either really like it or maybe you don't. I'm not sure there's a whole lot of in between with stuff like this. But I really enjoyed this book. I gave this a 4 out of 5 on Goodreads. I think it was a really good book. I think it was really well done. I think it's really well-told story. And I think that there's enough material that is intriguing enough for you to continue to at least read the rest of the trilogy. There's enough there to want to know what happens and to want to know about these characters and these dragons and Pern and the threads and whatnot. So I gave this a 4 out of 5. I thought it was really well done. Some things aged a little bit, and that happens with a book that you read that's 44 decades old. But overall, I think it aged fine. I think it's still pretty good to read now. I don't think it's too anachronistic. I don't think it's just one of those old-timey books that you read and you go, oh, that was nice back in the day. But I still think it's a good book to read. And if you are into fantasy and if you're into science fiction, then I think you would really enjoy reading, at least picking up the trilogy, right? The first 3 books of her trilogy. So that is my review of Dragonflight by Anne McCaffrey, right here. I'm going to be continuing on with Dragon Quest. I'm actually going to be reading them in publication order, so it may be skipping around from trilogy to trilogy, but I will be reading them in publication order. And the next one that was published was Dragon Quest, so I am going to read that. And if people want me to do a review on it, I will continue with it. Like I said, we'll see how much traction this kind of stuff gets. If it doesn't get a lot of traction, we'll move on and we'll review something else. But guys, thanks for watching my book review of Dragonflight by Anne McCaffrey. Spit a little there. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for watching, liking, commenting, and subscribing. Tell your friends, tell your enemies, and until next time, I will see you in the next book review.